The satellite feed went black at 3:47 hours, and with it, any hope of understanding what had turned 12 Navy SEALs into ghosts in the Afghanistan mountains. Command watched helplessly as infrared signatures vanished one by one from their screens, leaving only the cold digital silence that meant either equipment failure or something far worse. The mission was supposed to be routine: extract a high-value target from a Taliban compound nestled in the Hindu Kush. Instead, it had become a mystery that would haunt the Pentagon for weeks to come. Captain Myra, Venom, Kowalski was supposed to be flying a desk that morning, relegated to briefing junior pilots about proper fuel management and landing procedures. At 34, she'd already logged more combat hours than most pilots saw in their entire careers, but after her last deployment had ended in controversy, the Air Force seemed content to let her gather dust in Colorado Springs. The call came at 400, dragging her from dreams of Afghan skis and the weight of decisions that still kept her awake most nights. "We need you airborne in 30 minutes, Colonel Hayes had said, his voice carrying the kind of urgency that meant someone important was making very bad decisions very quickly. "The SEALs went dark, and you're the only A-10 pilot we can get to their AO before sunrise." The Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II wasn't built for beauty. It was built for one thing: keeping American soldiers alive when everything else had gone to hell. As Venom pre-flighted her aircraft in the pre-dawn darkness, running her hands along the titanium bathtub that surrounded the cockpit, she tried to ignore the whispers from the ground crew. They all knew the stories, the unofficial reports that painted her last mission in shades of gray that made her superiors uncomfortable. A village. Civilians. Split-second decisions made at 300 feet and 300 knots. The engines spun up with their distinctive whine, and Venom felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like an old jacket. Somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, 12 of America's finest were either dead or dying, and she was about to fly into whatever hell had claimed them. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same Air Force that had been ready to ground her permanently was now sending her alone into hostile territory because, when the chips were down, there was no one else they trusted more. As she lifted off into the darkening sky, Venom couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would either redeem her career or end it forever. The mountains of Afghanistan held many secrets, and she was about to discover another one. The radio crackled to life as she climbed through 10,000 feet, heading east toward a sunrise that seemed determined to stay hidden behind the peaks. "Venom, this is Overlord. Your call sign for this mission is Guardian Angel. The SEAL's last known position is Grid 41 SUB 87,654 32,109. Be advised, we have no contact with ground forces, and the AO is considered extremely hostile." Guardian Angel. The designation felt like prophecy and curse rolled into one. Venom adjusted her heading and pushed the throttles forward, the twin General Electric TF-34 engines responding with the deep growl that had earned the A-10 its nickname, the Warthog. Below her, the landscape shifted from the familiar browns and greens of Colorado to the harsh, unforgiving terrain that had broken empires and humbled superpowers. The mission brief had been sparse, almost suspiciously so. 12 SEALs from DEVGRU had been tasked with capturing a Taliban commander believed to be coordinating attacks on coalition supply routes. The compound was isolated. Intelligence suggested minimal resistance, and the operation should have been completed before dawn. Instead, their communications had gone silent during the approach phase, and their GPS beacons had winked out one by one like candles in a hurricane. Venom's HUD displayed the approaching waypoint, still 90 minutes out at her current speed and altitude. She tried to piece together what could have gone wrong. SEALs didn't just disappear. They were too well-trained, too well-equipped, too professional. Even if they'd walked into an ambush, someone should have been able to transmit a distress call, call for immediate extraction, or at least give their position. The silence was more disturbing than any desperate radio call could have been. The sun finally crested the mountains ahead, painting the peaks in shades of gold and pink that belied the violence they had witnessed over the centuries. Venom checked her weapons systems. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon was loaded with 1,174 rounds of 30-depleted uranium shells, each one capable of turning an armored vehicle into scrap metal. Her wing pylons carried a mixed load of AGM-65 Maverick missiles and Mark 82 general-purpose bombs. It was enough firepower to level a city block, but she hoped she wouldn't need any of it. The radio remained ominously quiet as she crossed into Afghan airspace, the familiar terrain unfolding below her like a topographical map come to life. She'd flown over these same mountains dozens of times during her previous deployments, providing close air support for ground forces, hunting Taliban supply convoys, and patrolling the endless network of valleys and ridges where enemies could hide for decades. Each mission had chipped away at something inside her, wearing down the idealistic young pilot who had once believed that precision and good intentions were enough to keep innocent people safe. That illusion had died spectacularly 6 months earlier in a valley, not unlike the one she was approaching now. The after-action reports had cleared her of any wrongdoing, but Venom knew the truth was more complicated than any official investigation could capture. War had a way of turning heroes into footnotes and footnotes into cautionary tales, and she'd been walking that tightrope ever since. As she approached the target area, Venom began her descent, reducing power and dropping to 3,000 feet above ground level. The compound appeared ahead, a cluster of mud brick buildings arranged around a central courtyard, surrounded by poppy fields that stretched toward the mountains like a green carpet. It looked peaceful from altitude, almost pastoral, but Venom had learned not to trust appearances in Afghanistan. The most dangerous places often look the most innocent. She keyed her radio. "Overlord, Guardian Angel on station. I have eyes on the target compound. No sign of ground forces, friendly or hostile, requesting permission to conduct low reconnaissance." The response came back immediately, tinged with the kind of tension that suggested everyone at headquarters was holding their breath. "Guardian Angel, you are cleared for recon pass. Use extreme caution. We still have no contact with ground units." Venom pushed the stick forward, beginning her descent toward the compound. The A-10 wasn't built for stealth. Its twin engines and distinctive silhouette announced its presence for miles, but it was built to survive whatever hell waited below. As she dropped toward the deck, the details of the compound resolved with crystal clarity. The courtyard was empty, the buildings showed no signs of damage, and there was no evidence of the fierce firefight that should have accompanied the SEAL's disappearance. It was as if 12 of the world's most elite soldiers had simply vanished into thin air. Banking left to begin her approach, Venom caught a glint of something metallic in the morning sun. She adjusted her flight path, bringing her sensors to bear on the anomaly. What she saw made her blood run cold. Scattered throughout the compound's courtyard were pieces of military equipment, radios, night vision goggles, weapons, all arranged in neat piles as if someone had been collecting trophies. But there were no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just the abandoned gear of 12 men who had walked into hell and never walked out. "Overlord, Guardian Angel, I've got a problem down here." The radio silence stretched for long seconds before the controller's voice returned, carefully controlled but unable to hide the undercurrent of fear. "Guardian Angel, report." Venom circled the compound again, her trained eye cataloging every detail, every anomaly, every clue that might explain what had happened to the missing SEALs. The poppy fields around the compound were undisturbed, the surrounding ridgelines showed no signs of enemy positions, and the access roads bore no tire tracks or footprints. It was as if the SEALs had been erased from existence, leaving behind only their equipment as proof they had ever been there. "Overlord, I've got SEAL equipment scattered throughout the compound, but no personnel, friendly or hostile. This doesn't look like a firefight, it looks like a collection point. Someone was gathering souvenirs." The response was immediate and sharp. "Guardian Angel, you are to maintain altitude and observe only. Do not, repeat, do not engage targets without explicit authorization. But Venom was already pushing the A-10 into a steep climb, her mind racing through possibilities and tactical options. Someone or something had neutralized 12 Navy SEALs without leaving a trace of battle, and that someone was still out there. As she gained altitude, movement in the northern ridgeline caught her eye, a brief flash of reflected light that disappeared as soon as she focused on it. Then another, this one from the eastern approach, and another from the south. They were being watched. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a rescue mission or even a reconnaissance flight. It was a trap, carefully laid and patiently waiting for the inevitable response to the SEAL's disappearance. Someone had known that losing 12 elite operators would bring swift retaliation, and they had prepared accordingly. The equipment in the courtyard wasn't random. It was bait, designed to draw in whoever came looking and keep them focused on the wrong target, while the real threat positioned itself for the kill. Venom's training kicked in, her hands moving across the controls with the muscle memory of hundreds of combat sorties. She activated her defensive systems, began evasive maneuvers, and started climbing towards safer altitude. But even as she took defensive action, part of her mind was already working the problem. 12 SEALs didn't just disappear, and whoever had taken them was still out there, still dangerous, and still very much in control of the situation. The first surface-to-air missile launched from the northern ridgeline at 7:34 hours, its smoke trail etching a deadly arc across the morning sky. Venom saw it coming, a Soviet-era SA-7, probably supplied by Pakistani intelligence to Taliban forces operating in the region. She dropped chaff and flares, pulled the A-10 into a punishing climb, and felt the missile detonate harmlessly behind her. But it was just the beginning. Two more missiles launched simultaneously from the eastern and western ridgelines, their contrails creating a deadly triangle around her position. These weren't random shots fired by panicked fighters. They were carefully coordinated launches timed to force her into a predetermined flight path. Someone down there understood air-to-ground tactics and was using that knowledge to deadly effect. Overlord, Guardian Angel taking Sam fire from multiple positions. This is a coordinated ambush. Venom shouted into her radio as she threw the A-10 into a series of evasive maneuvers that would have torn apart a lesser aircraft. The Warthog absorbed the punishment, its titanium bathtub protecting her from shrapnel, while its redundant flight systems kept her airborne despite battle damage. The radio response was immediate but unhelpful. Guardian Angel, you are cleared to return fire. Eliminate hostile positions. Venom would have laughed if she hadn't been busy dodging another missile. Return fire against what? The ridgeline stretched for miles in every direction, providing countless hiding spots for mobile SAM teams. She could spend her entire ordnance load hitting empty rocks while the real threats relocated and prepared for another volley. This was exactly what they wanted. An expensive American warplane spending its ammunition on shadows, while the people who had eliminated 12 SEALs remained safely hidden. Instead of taking the bait, Venom did something unexpected. She stopped climbing and began descending back toward the compound, using the A-10's legendary durability to absorb hits while she got close enough to see what was really happening on the ground. The enemy had expected her to retreat to high altitude where she would be safe, but ineffective. They hadn't planned for a pilot crazy enough to fly directly into their kill zone. At 500 feet above ground level, the details of the compound became crystal clear. The SEAL equipment wasn't randomly scattered. It was arranged in a specific pattern that would only be visible from low altitude. Someone had been leaving a message, and Venom was the first person positioned to read it. The radios, weapons, and gear formed letters when viewed from above, spelling out a single word in English: come. It was an invitation, a challenge, and a trap all rolled into one. Someone down there wanted a face-to-face meeting, and they'd been willing to sacrifice 12 Navy SEALs to get it. The question was whether Venom was brave enough, or foolish enough, to accept. The next surface-to-air missile came from directly below, launched from within the compound itself. Venom saw the smoke trail and realized she'd been outplayed from the beginning. There were no SAM teams in the ridgelines. Those missiles had been remotely fired decoys designed to drive her down to low altitude where the real threat waited. Someone had studied American close air support tactics and found the perfect counter. Make the pilot think she was being smart by getting low and personal, then hit her when she was too close to maneuver. But the A-10 Thunderbolt II hadn't earned its reputation by being fragile. The missile detonated close enough to pepper the aircraft with shrapnel, but the titanium armor around the cockpit held firm. Warning lights illuminated across Venom's instrument panel, hydraulic pressure dropping, electrical systems fluctuating, fuel leak detected in the left wing, but the Warthog kept flying. It had been designed to absorb punishment that would destroy other aircraft, and today it was earning every penny of its development cost. Venom pulled back on the stick, gaining altitude and distance while her mind processed what she'd learned. 12 SEALs had been captured or killed by someone with sophisticated knowledge of American military tactics. That someone was now using the SEALs' disappearance as bait to draw in follow-up forces, presumably to eliminate them as well. The compound below wasn't a Taliban hideout. It was a killing ground prepared by someone who understood exactly how the American military would respond to the loss of elite personnel. The radio crackled with increasing urgency from Overlord. "Guardian Angel, report your status. We're showing battle damage on your aircraft." Guardian Angel to Overlord. "I'm still flying, but I've got a bigger problem. This isn't a rescue mission. It's an ambush. Someone down there knew we'd come looking for the SEALs, and they've turned the whole area into a trap. I count at least 6 SAM positions, and they're using coordinated fire to channel my movements." The silence from headquarters stretched long enough that Venom wondered if her communications had been damaged. When Overlord finally responded, the voice was different, older, more senior, carrying the weight of command decisions that could affect thousands of lives. "Guardian Angel, this is General Morrison. You are to disengage immediately and return to base. We're scrambling a full strike package to deal with this situation." Venom felt something cold settle in her stomach. A full strike package meant F-16s, maybe F-15Es, loaded with precision-guided munitions. It meant turning the entire valley into a smoking crater to eliminate whatever threat had claimed the SEALs. It also meant that any chance of finding those 12 operators alive would disappear in a cloud of high explosives and good intentions. "Sir, respectfully request permission to continue reconnaissance. If the SEALs are still alive down there, an airstrike will eliminate any chance of extraction." "Guardian Angel, you've already taken battle damage, and intelligence suggests this is a sophisticated ambush designed specifically to eliminate follow-up forces. Your mission is complete. Return to base." But Venom was already banking back toward the compound, her decision made. 12 men had disappeared into the mountains of Afghanistan, and she was the only person in position to find out what had happened to them. The Air Force had spent months questioning her judgment, second-guessing her decisions, and relegating her to training flights and administrative duties. Today, when it mattered most, she was going to prove that her instincts were still sharp, and her commitment to bringing soldiers home was unshakable. The A-10 dropped to 50 feet above the deck, skimming over poppy fields and irrigation ditches at 300 knots. At this altitude and speed, she was nearly impossible to track with shoulder-fired missiles, but she was also flying directly into whatever trap waited at the compound. It was a calculated risk based on one simple principle. Someone who had gone to this much trouble to set up an elaborate ambush wasn't planning to kill their targets immediately. They wanted something, and until Venom figured out what that was, the SEALs might still be alive. The compound rushed toward her like a scene from an action movie, its mud brick walls and flat rooftops expanding to fill her windscreen. At the last second, she pulled back on the stick, climbing vertically over the central courtyard while her targeting systems locked onto movement below. What she saw made her blood run cold and her finger hover over the trigger of her 30 cannon. In the courtyard where SEAL equipment had been arranged to spell out, "Come," 12 figures in American military uniforms knelt in a perfect line, their hands bound behind their backs and black hoods covering their heads. They were alive, but that could change in seconds if she made the wrong choice. Standing behind them was a single figure in traditional Afghan dress, holding what appeared to be a radio detonator. The message was clear: land and negotiate, or watch 12 American heroes die on live television. Venom pulled the A-10 into a steep climb, her mind racing through options and consequences. Every tactical manual she'd ever read said the same thing: never negotiate with terrorists, never land in hostile territory, never put yourself at the mercy of an enemy who had already proven their willingness to kill Americans. But those same manuals had been written by people who had never watched through a targeting pod as friends and allies faced execution, while you held the power to save them. The radio erupted with angry voices from Overlord, demanding explanations and threatening court-martial proceedings. General Morrison's voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "Guardian Angel, you are ordered to disengage immediately. Do not attempt a landing, do not attempt a rescue, and do not engage targets in the compound. That is a direct order." Venom looked down at the 12 kneeling figures and knew that following orders would mean watching them die. Not following orders would mean the end of her career and possibly her freedom, but it might also mean bringing 12 husbands, fathers, and sons home to their families. The choice should have been impossible, but somehow it felt like the easiest decision she'd ever made. She keyed her radio one last time. "Overlord, Guardian Angel going off comms. I've got Americans to save." Then she turned off her radio, dropped the A-10's landing gear, and began her descent toward the compound that had swallowed 12 Navy SEALs and was now reaching out for her. The morning sun painted her aircraft's shadow across the poppy fields like a dark angel descending from heaven, and for the first time in months, Captain Myra Kowalski felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The landing was harder than anything she'd attempted since flight school, the A-10's main gear slamming into the packed earth of the compound's central courtyard with enough force to compress the aircraft's shock struts to their limits. Dust erupted around the Warthog's twin engines, creating a brown cloud that obscured everything beyond 50 feet. Venom kept the engine spooled up as she popped the canopy, her sidearm already in her hand and her survival radio clipped to her vest. If this went wrong, she wanted to at least give her location to the search and rescue teams that would eventually come looking. The dust settled slowly, revealing a scene that belonged in a nightmare rather than a military operation. The 12 SEALs remained kneeling in their perfect line, motionless as statues despite the chaos of her landing. The figure behind them had not moved either, still holding the radio detonator that could end all their lives in an instant. But there was something wrong with the picture, something that made Venom's combat instincts scream warnings she couldn't quite articulate. "You came," a voice said from behind her. Venom spun around to find herself facing a woman in her 50s, wearing the uniform of a Pakistani army colonel but speaking English with a distinctly American accent. "I wasn't certain you would. Your reputation suggests a pilot who follows orders and avoids unnecessary risks." Venom kept her pistol trained on the woman while her eyes swept the compound for additional threats. The SEALs were still kneeling, still motionless, and something about their absolute stillness was beginning to terrify her. "Let them go. Whatever you want, we can discuss it without keeping 12 men as hostages." The woman smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "12 men, Captain Kowalski, when was the last time you actually counted your hostages?" Venom's eyes flicked back to the line of kneeling figures, and her heart stopped. There were 13 figures in American uniforms, not 12. The 13th knelt at the end of the line, slightly apart from the others, and something about his posture was familiar in a way that made her soul crawl with recognition. "You see it now," the woman said, her voice carrying the satisfied tone of someone who had played a long game and finally revealed their winning hand. "The 13th man is why you're really here, Captain. He's been waiting for you for 6 months." Venom approached the line of prisoners, her weapon still trained on the woman but her attention focused on the 13th figure. Even with the black hood covering his face, she recognized the shoulders, the way he held his head, the small scar on his left hand that was visible despite the restraints. Master Sergeant Jake Reeves had been her forward air controller during her last deployment, the man who had guided her strikes and trusted her judgment, until everything went wrong in a village whose name she tried not to remember. "Jake," she whispered, and the figure's head turned slightly toward her voice. The woman behind her continued her explanation as if discussing the weather. "Sergeant Reeves has been our guest for quite some time now. He was captured during a reconnaissance mission 3 weeks after your incident in the Helmand province. Since then, he's been telling us fascinating stories about American close air support procedures, tactical communications, and the psychological profiles of specific pilots who might respond to certain scenarios." Venom felt the world tilt on its axis as the implications became clear. Jake hadn't been killed in the village he'd been captured, probably tortured, and had been giving up operational intelligence to save his own life. Every detail of this ambush, from the missing SEALs to the carefully orchestrated SAM attacks, had been planned using information he had provided. Her oldest friend and most trusted partner had been turned into a weapon aimed directly at her heart. "The other 12 aren't SEALs, are they?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Local fighters in American uniforms, equipped with gear taken from previous captures. They've been dead since yesterday. We couldn't risk them spoiling the performance by moving at the wrong time. But Sergeant Reeves is very much alive and very eager to see you again. Aren't you, Jake?" The hooded figure nodded slowly, and Venom heard a sound that cut through her soul like broken glass. Jake Reeves was crying. Not the silent tears of a stoic soldier, but the broken sobs of a man who had been pushed beyond his breaking point and forced to betray everything he had once held sacred. Venom raised her pistol toward the woman, her finger tightening on the trigger. "Let him go, now, or I start shooting and see how many of your people I can take with me." "I don't think you will," the woman replied calmly. "Because if you fire that weapon, Sergeant Reeves dies first, and then you'll have to live with the knowledge that you killed the only person who truly understood what happened in Helmand Province. The only person who knew that you made the right choice that day, even when it looked wrong to everyone else." The pistol wavered in Venom's hand as memories flooded back. The village, the children running toward what looked like a playground but was actually a Taliban ammunition cache. The split-second decision to fire warning shots that had saved 30 innocents but killed 2 fighters who had been using human shields. Jake had been there, had guided her through the confusion, had backed up her story when the investigation started. He had been the one voice supporting her when everyone else was looking for someone to blame. "He broke after 6 weeks, the woman continued, her voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone describing a laboratory experiment. "The physical torture wasn't what did it. These American Special Operations soldiers are remarkably resistant to pain. It was the psychological pressure. We showed him video of your career falling apart, your isolation from your unit, your relegation to meaningless training assignments. We convinced him that his capture was your fault, that you had abandoned him in Helmand Province to save your own reputation." Venom's hand was shaking now, the pistol's sights wavering between the woman and the kneeling figure of her former friend. Everything about this situation was designed to break her: the false rescue mission, the elaborate ambush, the reveal that her most trusted ally had been turned against her. Someone had studied her psychological profile with the same precision that had characterized the tactical elements of the trap. "What do you want?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "We want you to make a choice, Captain Kowalski. The same kind of choice you made in Helmand Province, but with much clearer consequences. You can shoot me and die here with Sergeant Reeves, becoming martyrs to American stubbornness. Or you can put down your weapon and come with us, saving his life and giving us access to the tactical knowledge we need to eliminate other American pilots who might threaten our operations. The radio on Venom's vest crackled to life. She'd forgotten about her survival beacon. Guardian Angel, this is Overlord. Strike package is inbound your location. You have 60 seconds to clear the area before we engage targets. The woman smiled again, this expression holding genuine warmth for the first time. And there's option 3. You can run back to your aircraft and escape before your own Air Force turns this compound into a crater. Sergeant Reeves will die, of course, but you'll live to fly another day. Just like Helmand Province, you'll have to choose who lives and who dies based on incomplete information and impossible time pressure. Venom looked at her watch. 55 seconds until the strike package arrived. Not enough time to extract Jake, not enough time to fight her way out, not enough time to do anything except make the same kind of split-second decision that had been haunting her dreams for 6 months. The only difference was that this time, she knew exactly who would die because of her choice. She holstered her pistol and began walking toward Jake's kneeling form. I'm not leaving him. Captain, you have 40 seconds, the radio crackled again. Abort immediately or you will be caught in the blast radius. Venom reached Jake and began working on his restraints, her fingers flying over the knots while her eyes remained fixed on the woman with the detonator. If you're going to kill us, do it now, but I'm not running away from another friend. The woman lowered the detonator and for the first time her facade cracked slightly. In all our psychological modeling, we never considered that option. You were supposed to choose self-preservation or meaningless sacrifice. We never thought you'd choose redemption. Jake's hood came off, revealing a face that had aged a decade in 6 months. His eyes were hollow, his cheeks sunken, and when he looked at Venom there was a mixture of relief and shame that broke her heart. Myra, I'm sorry. I told them everything. About you, about our procedures, about how you think. I couldn't. They made me watch videos of your career ending and I thought. It's okay, Venom whispered, cutting through his restraints while keeping one eye on the woman. None of this is your fault. We're going home. 20 seconds on her radio. Not enough time to reach the A-10, not enough time to get airborne, but maybe enough time to get clear of the compound. Venom hauled Jake to his feet, supporting his weight while she looked around for any possible escape route. The compound walls were too high to scale quickly, the main gate was too far away, and her aircraft was directly in the center of what would soon become a very large crater. There's a drainage tunnel under the eastern wall, Jake gasped, his voice barely audible. I saw them use it to bring in supplies. It leads to an irrigation ditch about 200 meters out. 10 seconds. Venom half-carried, half-dragged Jake toward the eastern wall, her legs pumping with the desperate energy of someone who had finally found something worth dying for. Behind them, the woman with the detonator made no move to stop them, as if their escape attempt was simply another interesting data point in her ongoing experiment. They reached the drainage tunnel as the first bomb detonated in the compound's courtyard, the shockwave throwing them forward into the concrete pipe, with enough force to knock them both unconscious. The last thing Venom remembered was the sound of her A-10 being torn apart by American ordnance, its titanium armor finally meeting a force it couldn't withstand. She woke up 3 hours later in a field hospital, her head wrapped in bandages and Jake sleeping in the cot next to her. A young Air Force lieutenant she didn't recognize was sitting by her bedside with a clipboard and the kind of expression that suggested she was about to receive very bad news. Captain Kowalski, I'm Lieutenant Morrison, General Morrison's aide. I need to debrief you on the events at the compound, and then there are some people from the Pentagon who want to speak with you. Venom struggled to sit up, wincing as various injuries made themselves known. How's Jake? Sergeant Reeves is stable, dehydrated, malnourished, and showing signs of prolonged psychological stress, but he'll recover. The medical team says you probably saved his life by getting him clear of the blast area. And the woman, the one who was running the ambush. Lieutenant Morrison consulted his clipboard, frowning. We didn't find any survivors at the compound, Captain. The strike package eliminated all enemy personnel, and there's no evidence that anyone escaped. According to the post-strike reconnaissance, you and Sergeant Reeves were the only living people who came out of that place. Venom closed her eyes, trying to process information that didn't align with her memories. The woman had been real. She'd spoken to her, explained the entire operation, lowered the detonator to let them escape. Someone that sophisticated, that prepared, didn't just vanish in an airstrike, unless vanishing was part of the plan. Captain, there's something else, the lieutenant continued, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone delivering news that could be either wonderful or terrible. The Pentagon investigation into the Helmand Province incident has been officially closed. New evidence has come to light that supports your version of events, and your actions have been deemed appropriate given the tactical situation. Your record has been cleared, and there's discussion of a commendation for today's mission. Venom opened her eyes and looked at Jake, still sleeping despite the conversation happening 3 feet away. His face was peaceful for the first time in months, the lines of stress and guilt finally smoothed by genuine rest. Whatever he had endured during his captivity, whatever information he had been forced to give up, it was over now. They were both going home, and that was the only thing that mattered. But as she settled back into her hospital bed, Venom couldn't shake the feeling that she had been part of something much larger than a rescue mission. The woman's words echoed in her memory. In all our psychological modeling, we never considered that option. Someone had been studying American military psychology, testing responses to impossible choices, and gathering data on how individual pilots reacted under extreme pressure. The question was, what did they plan to do with that information? 6 weeks later, Captain Myra Venom Kowalski stood on the tarmac at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, watching her new being prepared for its first training flight since Afghanistan. The Warthog was identical to the one she'd lost in the compound. Same weapon systems, same armor configuration, same reliable ugliness that had made her fall in love with the aircraft in the first place. But somehow it felt different, as if the experience in the mountains had changed not just her but everything she touched. Jake had been cleared for duty the previous week, though both of them knew he would never deploy overseas again. The psychological evaluation had been gentle but thorough, and the conclusion was that Master Sergeant Jake Reeves needed time to process his experiences before returning to any high-stress environment. He'd been assigned to a training unit at Fort Carson, where he would spend his remaining years teaching young soldiers the same forward air control procedures that had once saved both their lives. "You ready for this?" Jake asked, approaching across the tarmac with 2 cups of coffee and the slightly cautious expression he'd worn since his rescue. Their friendship was slowly healing, but both of them knew it would never be quite the same. Some betrayals, even involuntary ones, left scars that time could fade but never completely erase. Venom accepted the coffee and took a sip, savoring the bitter taste that had become her morning ritual. "I've been ready for weeks. The question is whether they're ready for me." They referred to the new class of A-10 pilots she'd been assigned to train, young aviators fresh out of flight school, who would learn close air support procedures from someone who had actually used them in combat. It was a good assignment, one that recognized her experience while keeping her close to home, where the Air Force could keep an eye on her. Everyone was being very careful not to call it a probationary position, but Venom understood the subtext. "Any word on the investigation?" Jake asked, though they both knew he was really asking about the woman from the compound. "Officially, there is no investigation. The compound was destroyed, the enemy personnel were eliminated, and we rescued an American prisoner of war. Mission accomplished." Venom's tone carried just enough sarcasm to indicate her opinion of official conclusions. "Unofficially, There are some very interested people in Washington who want to understand how someone managed to orchestrate such a sophisticated ambush using intelligence that should have been impossible to obtain. The implication hung between them like smoke. Someone in the American military or intelligence community had provided information that enabled the ambush, but finding that someone would require acknowledging that the ambush had been more than just Taliban fighters with lucky shots. It would require admitting that America's enemies were becoming more sophisticated.